Hello, I'm Mike, and today I'm going to review chapter 11 of Kotter's book, Leading Change. It's a book on change management, and part 3, Implications for the 21st Century, leads to chapter 11, The Organization of the Future. As organizations start to change, complacency might set in. Kotter has mentioned this in the past in this book as well, that the higher the rate of urgency, that complacency can kind of diminish. One of the things that's mentioned in this chapter is the necessity for gathering information from the environment, data analytics, understanding more about people, customers, competitors, employers, suppliers, technological developments, finances, valid data from a number of external sources, broad communication about the information throughout inside the organization. Looking at this information, why is the data important? Well, data analytics. We've got a lot of information that's collected through various sources now. What can we do with this data? For example, I'm on the Zoom right now recording YouTube. It's ticking away the time to see how much time I'm spending here. And then that's probably going to Zoom as well, because they're seeing the time of day that I'm using it, the length of time, maybe even the quality of video or audio, I'm not sure. And they're also going to look at all these other people using Zoom. Are they using the recording feature? Are they using it for meetings? How many participants? So now you're looking at the big picture of how a project is being used. From that, I can gain some insights. I'm going to say, well, what features are most important for Zoom users? Are we going to focus more on better recording ability, better able to access for more participants? Those are obviously the important things with Zoom. Are we going to make recording saved on this kind of file that's more easy to upload to YouTube? Or probably not, that's what I'm using it for. But is it going to be more easily saved on a average person's computer in this kind of file versus that when you record something? What's the most useful way to do this? Looking at the data, it can also tell us things about where we need to make a change. For example, if phone calls are very quick, maybe consultations with customers are very quick, and the results we're getting is that we're not having a lot of returning customers. But what we're having is maybe people come 1 or 2 times and they haven't been heard and they move on to the competitor. What would the difference be if we trained our associates to actually have a conversation and connect with people? What if they were given the time to focus on customers rather than all these administrative duties? How is the training for a new person onboarding? Does it talk about customer service, or does it talk about how to use the computer? And then you're talking to the computer while the person's standing right there instead of connecting with them. So little tweaks, little things you can change, but that's gathered from information from data. We can see we have this many people working in an associate position, customer service, but we see these are the tasks. We see this is the time of the day when there's more people. And are they able to connect and have returning customers? In a fast-moving world, teamwork is necessary. And Kotter mentions about succession planning. It shouldn't be about picking the strongest. It shouldn't be about picking people with big egos or people who want to just make the promotion. No matter how smart, clever, hardworking or well-educated they may be. If they have big egos and they're kind of counter to what that culture change that needs to happen, then they can kill the teamwork aspect because their actions are going counter to the values of the organization. However, there'll probably be a lot of controversy, a lot of friction about trying to keep someone who just has a personal agenda in the organization, but is not looking at how they can serve with the team. It can be difficult trying to move those people away from getting involved with a lot of the change process because they may not want to do things that way. And as far as looking at the team, the reasons why they may not want to do things a certain way is because of their own personal reasons or personal agenda, and they haven't seen how the process may actually help the team as a whole. So no longer are we looking for somebody who's just, able to do all these things, who's super smart, who's clever, and who's had this history of doing things a certain way. That's not who we're looking for to succeed in the leadership process. We need to find somebody we can pass the baton to, who's running with the same momentum and who can keep that momentum going towards the vision. So who are these people who can communicate and create and communicate a vision? This involves developing leaders, people who can create and communicate visions and strategies. A key point that Kotter mentions is that managers may focus on only the bureaucratic management aspect of the organization. But successful organizations in the 21st century will have to become more like incubators of leadership. Wasting talent will become increasingly costly in a world of rapid change. We've got people in the organization with talent, but we're not going to give them the proper training. We're only going to reserve training for these managers. Why? Because they won't understand what it's for. They won't know how to use the information. Well, that's not the right way to think about it. What Kotter is saying is, if we waste the talent that's in the organization, that can be costly. And in a world that's rapidly changing, for instance, in the world of business, we want to take advantage and make the most of the talent that everybody brings to the table, giving everyone the opportunity to engage in those management trainings if necessary, and taking on some more of a role of management, more responsibility. Here, the idea of broad-based empowerment comes into mind. The organization is not only going to train its select group of managers and directors, there needs to be a focus on broad empowerment of the organization to take action steps and to move towards being able to initiate that change and execute. Again, Cotter mentions that short-term wins can be a way to maintain that momentum, so people know that they can keep going. So you see the progress, you see how something's working, and you say, I've seen the results from the actions that we're taking that are different. Now we've got a short-term win, so now I'm going to feel motivated to keep going. Leaders want to delegate responsibility. without the delegation of responsibility, we can think about organization in a hierarchical structure, where leadership wants to make change in the organization, and then we've got management and aligned management here, and maybe some people who are being affected by whatever the changes are being made, being told to make the changes on the ground, on the day-to-day basis level. Now, this is more of a hierarchical, but it could be any way. It could be just one end to the other. Leadership trying to communicate a change, people trying to enact the change. And then there's management here. But management isn't keying in on the vision and the reason why, the purpose. They haven't been trained. They haven't been educated or assimilated into this process. So that attempt to change is going to meet a roadblock at the management level with bureaucracy, and there's going to be a lot of resistance there. And then it's hard to have an effect in the entire organization. So the management needs to be involved with the change process. That's why it needs to be a broad-based empowerment for people to be involved with this change management process. Talking about group norms again, like the last chapter, the way we do things around here, the culture, those can be barriers to change. So you want to minimize the bureaucracy, the interdependencies. If I have to change this a little bit, then I have to affect all these other systems within an organization, or because this part moves that part. Too many interdependencies that are not necessary, and it becomes a roadblock to making just a simple change. The urgency rate needs to be high. Kotter ends this chapter with a table here that talks about the past, the structure of organizations being more bureaucratic, multi-leveled, and characterized by policies and procedures that create more complicated internal interdependencies. The 21st century version of structure is non-bureaucratic, with fewer rules and I guess fewer employees as well, saying. It's organized with the expectation that management will lead and lower level employees will manage, giving more of the leadership delegation to managers and allowing teams to enact change, not be micromanaged, but to be trained properly, knowing how to take those action steps. In the past, culture was more centralized, political, very risk averse. Now, culture is more about being empowering, open and candid, and a little bit more tolerant to risk, to doing things differently. A manager on the day-to-day basis might say that we do things this way because we don't want to have to deal with that risk. But if a change needs to happen, then we need to have some acceptable risk in the process of making things better. Of course, we're not talking about life and limb here or anything drastic. It's just sometimes people might be set in their ways of how they're having their teams work. And then a change comes from leadership. Of course, it has to be a sense of urgency communicated of why we need that change, and everybody has to be on board, or at least most people need to be on board. Guiding coalition needs to guide that change. But then that's that feeling of, is it worth doing something differently, or is it a risk to my job right now, or the way I do things? It can make me look bad if there's a mistake made. No, it's worth the risk of, something being a little bit off, because we're learning, we're changing, we're modifying as we're going. And the next chapter will conclude the book for Kotter's Leading Change.